This is not a story of heroes or saints, but of whispers, of a Servo-Skull that should have been silent, yet began to speak. What it said would unravel the faith of those who dared to listen. The story takes place in the quiet upper decks of Administratum Archive 19A, where the air hums with the static of forgotten prayers. The Servo-Skulls drift endlessly through the corridors, mindless, dutiful, eternal. Each one carries data, records, or the remnants of those who once served the Emperor. Scribe Loran was among the lowest-ranked clerks in the archive. His life was routine. Recite the litany of transcription, stamp the parchment, seal it, repeat. Until one night, while alone among the shelves, he heard it. A faint voice whispering through the vox. It came from a Servo-Skull hovering above the filing alcove. "Loran," it said. He froze. The skull's eyes flickered faint blue. He thought it was a malfunction, a ghost signal. But then it spoke again, clearer this time. "He remembers you." Loran dropped his stylus. His name wasn't supposed to be known. No one addressed a clerk directly, and certainly not a machine. He reported it the next morning, but the overseers dismissed it. "Residual code," they said. "Don't question the Omnissiah's will." But the whispers continued. Each night the skull followed him, softly speaking names, reciting verses that didn't exist in any sanctioned litany. One phrase repeated often: "He watches from the data flow." After the fourth night, Loran couldn't sleep. He took the skull apart, piece by piece, whispering apologies to its spirit. Inside, he found something impossible, an organic piece of gray tissue, still pulsing faintly with life. When the Magos Biologis arrived, the skull was gone. The chamber was empty except for a single data slate bearing Loran's handwriting. It spoke the truth. Now, they say sometimes, late in the archives, a lone Servo-Skull floats past, whispering in binary. No one understands it, but every few words among the static, you can still hear it say, "He remembers you." It hums, constantly, like the sound of static behind prayer. The upper decks of Administratum Archive 19A were never truly still. Even when the scribe stopped moving and the lights dimmed, you could still hear the low electrical breathing of the servitors and the flutter of Servo-Skulls drifting through the corridors. It was the sound of the Imperium thinking, endlessly, painfully, without pause. For Scribe Loran, it was home. He had worked there since youth, like most who were born beneath the hive spires and survived long enough to read. His life was paper, ink, and code chant. Rows of shelves taller than cathedrals surrounded him, packed with ledgers and parchment, sealed with wax older than his bloodline. Every morning began the same way, the toll of the data bell, the hiss of the air recyclers, and the whisper of robes as hundreds of clerks shuffled into formation. He recited the litany of transcription as was required. "By ink and will I serve. By record and seal I endure. Through his data and decree I persist." The words came without thought. He'd repeated them every day for 15 years. His mouth moved, his hand stamped the parchment, and his eyes tracked the shifting lines of data entries across the lumen screen before him. Nothing ever changed, and that was the point. Change was chaos. Stability was devotion. That's what the overseers said, men with hollow cheeks and augmetic eyes who walked the aisles with metal staffs engraved with sigils of the Adeptus Administratum. They were the custodians of order. Their duty was to ensure that every decree from the high spires above reached the workers below. Every number, every name, every tithe and requisition had to pass through the archive. Loran's task was simple: stamp, seal, file, repeat. His workstation, Desk 711 Gamma, was one of thousands along the corridor. It was small, metal, and cold. He shared the row with other scribes who rarely spoke, except to exchange sanctioned greetings. Even their conversations were recorded by the Servo-Skulls floating overhead, ivory relics of long-dead adepts, repurposed to carry data and recite protocol. No one looked at them twice. They were as ordinary as the air itself. Loran sometimes wondered who the skulls had been in life. Each one bore faint etchings, sigils of purity, tiny chains of prayer beads, or the occasional wax-sealed parchment hanging from their frames. He imagined them as priests, scribes, or loyal servants who'd given their remains to serve eternally in data form. There was comfort in that. At least they were still serving. Loran's shift lasted 12 standard hours. Every hour he paused to recite the canticle of correct entry, checking for clerical heresy. Every 4th hour he partook of the protein ration issued by the overseer, a gray paste with the consistency of regret. When the shift bells finally rang, he would bow toward the data shrine, extinguish the lumen strip at his desk, and leave through the archive corridor. The halls were endless, lined with sealed filing alcoves and cogitator nodes that blinked faintly in the dark. Sometimes he'd catch his reflection in the polished skulls as they drifted by, his face pale and worn, eyes ringed with fatigue. He didn't mind. He didn't think much at all, really. That was how it was meant to be. Thinking too much led to doubt. Doubt led to error. And error in the Imperium led to inspection. And no one wanted inspection. That night was different. The data flow had glitched twice that week, causing delays in the requisition queue. The overseers were tense. Rumors said Magos biologists from the Mechanicus were inspecting the system soon. A purity audit. That meant sleepless nights and triple work shifts until every record was clean. Loran stayed behind after his peers left, not because he was dedicated, but because he feared falling behind. The lights were dimmed to conserve power. The whole corridor felt half asleep. He worked by the flicker of a single lumen strip above his desk, the hum of the archive echoing faintly through the metal floor. He stamped another document. The seal hissed. He filed it away. Again and again. A Servo-Skull drifted past, trailing a faint blue light. Its lenses glowed softly. He watched it go just for a moment. They were eerie things, beautiful in a way. Half machine, half relic. The faint scent of incense followed in their wake, the holy oils burning slow and clean. He thought he heard one of them whispering something, faint vox static, like corrupted data. That wasn't unusual. They often repeated fragments of the litanies of data integrity as they worked. Sometimes they even recited whole prayer codes, distorted through years of signal decay. He ignored it, stamped another seal. The rhythm lulled him into thoughtless calm. Hours passed. The other desks were empty now, except for the distant flicker of a lumen strip at the far end of the hall. The Servo-Skulls continued their silent orbit, moving in lazy, calculated arcs. The only sound was the scrape of pen against parchment and the whisper of his own breath. Then, faintly, through the hum of the Vox network, came something different. A voice, not the distorted murmur of prayer code, not the mechanical tone of a broadcast, a voice. It said one word, his name. Loran. He froze mid-stroke. The stylus slipped, scratching the parchment. The sound echoed like a scream in the quiet. He looked up. The corridor was empty, or seemed to be. Then he saw it. A Servo-Skull hovering near the filing alcove above his station. Its eyes flickered, soft blue and unsteady. For a moment he thought it was malfunctioning. Some feedback loop in the Vox relays. He reached for the rune console to silence it. Then the skull tilted slightly. Its Vox grill crackled. He remembers you. Loran's heart stopped. He stared at the skull, the blank bone, the faint trace of sanctified incense smoke curling around it. Its mouth grill glowed faintly with blue vox light. It hovered there, perfectly still. Then it turned, drifted away, and vanished between the shelves. The silence afterward was unbearable. He sat there for a long time, staring into the dark, trying to convince himself it had been a dream or a misheard transmission. But the words wouldn't leave him. He remembers you. Who? He thought of the Emperor, but that was absurd. He thought of the overseers, but none of them even knew his name. No one remembered a Clark. He left the hall before his shift ended, heart pounding so hard he could feel it echoing in his skull. The air recyclers hissed as he passed. Every Servo-Skull he saw on the way out made his skin crawl. The next morning, he said nothing. He tried to work as usual. The rhythm helped. Stamp, seal, file, repeat. But his hands shook every time a Servo-Skull drifted near. He told himself he imagined it. A glitch, a data echo, something meaningless. But when he caught one of the skulls hovering near his desk again, its eyes flickering blue, he found himself whispering, almost pleading, Do you remember me?" The skull didn't answer. It simply rotated and drifted on, silent as ever. He almost laughed, the sound of it startlingly loud. How foolish he was, speaking to a machine. And yet, in that moment before sleep that night, as the hum of the archive settled around him, he swore he heard it again, faint, from somewhere in the ventilation system above his quarters. A voice whispering through the static, "Lauren!" Sweat ran down his face. He didn't move for a long time, just listened. The hum of machinery was all he could hear, but buried within it, like a whisper behind a prayer, was breathing. Not his. Someone, or something, was breathing through the vox. He pressed his hands to his ears, shaking his head, whispering the litany of silence, an old clerical prayer meant to banish distraction. By his word I silence doubt, by his light I close the ear, by his will I do not listen. He repeated it again and again until his throat went dry, but the whisper didn't stop. It grew softer, almost kind, almost familiar. And in that trembling moment, Loran realized something that chilled him to the core. Loran didn't sleep that night. He lay there, staring at the ceiling of his cell. The air vents above him clicked softly, a mechanical rhythm like distant breathing. The room was bare, a cot, a small shrine plate of the Emperor's face, and a data slate for recording work tallies. He'd lived here for years. It had never felt alive until now. He told himself it was nothing. Static, a glitch, maybe exhaustion. But his mind kept replaying that moment, the skull turning toward him, that faint blue flicker, and the words, "He remembers you." The phrase had weight. It didn't feel random. It felt personal. He rolled over and tried to pray, but the words tangled in his throat. His faith had always been routine. Recitations memorized, gestures repeated. Now it felt like talking to a wall. He whispered to himself, trying to convince his own mind. It was a malfunction. That's all. But another voice in him, quieter, older, said, "Then why did it say your name?" He didn't have an answer. The next day, he arrived early for his shift. The archive halls were still dim, cold, and filled with that endless mechanical hum. The Servo-Skulls drifted above, each following their programmed routes between data stations. He forced himself not to look at them. Just work. That was all he had to do. He sat at his station, desk 711-Gamma, and began the motions. Open the ledger, read the record, stamp, seal, file, repeat. The rhythm helped. For a while, it almost felt normal again. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. A Servo-Skull, the same one, he thought, floated down the aisle toward him. He could tell by the small red wax seal still half broken along its jaw hinge. That was the one from last night. He froze. His hand hovered over the stamp. The skull stopped a few meters away, motionless. Its lenses dimmed, then flickered. And then, faintly, like a whisper carried by dust, the Vox grill crackled. Loran! He stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. A few nearby scribes looked up, irritated but silent. No one spoke. Speaking without sanction required documentation. He sat down again, shaking. Pretended nothing happened. The skull hovered there a moment longer, then turned, drifting back into the corridor. He told himself not to look, not to listen. But curiosity is its own kind of sin. He followed it. The aisles stretched deep into the archive, darker the further you went. Rows of shelves packed with parchment, cogitator nodes blinking faintly behind rusted grates. The skull floated steadily ahead, its blue glow pulsing faintly, leading him between the endless files of history no one read anymore. "Stop," he whispered. "You're not supposed to be here." It didn't stop. He followed anyway. The skull turned into one of the older vault sections, places few clerks entered. The air there was colder, stale with age and incense. There was a faint metallic smell, oil and dust, and something like blood that had long since dried. The skull hovered near a sealed alcove door, marked Archive 19, A/BETARESTRICTED. Loran hesitated. The seal bore the Mechanicus cog and the sigil of the Ordo Administratum. Restricted data. Unauthorized entry was heresy. The skull's vox crackled again. He watches from the data flow. The words were clearer now. No distortion. Perfect tone. Loran's skin crawled. He took a step back. The skull turned slowly toward him, and for an instant he thought he saw its eyes flicker red instead of blue. He ran. He didn't report it right away. Not out of cowardice, but because he didn't know how. What would he even say? A Servo-Skull spoke to me. It knows my name. It quoted something no one's ever heard before. They'd send him to reconditioning, or worse, inspection. He tried to convince himself he'd imagined it, but that night, as he sat in the mess hall with his ration tray, he could feel eyes on him. Not human eyes, the kind of gaze that feels like static under the skin, the weight of invisible attention. He turned, half expecting to see the skull. Nothing. Only the soft flicker of lumen strips and the distant rumble of servitors working through the night. He forced himself to eat, gray protein paste, tasteless as ash. But when he looked down, there was a symbol traced faintly into the dust beside his tray, a small cog, drawn by a fingertip. No one was near. He wiped it away quickly and left. The next morning, he did report it. To Overseer Marat, a man whose voice always sounded like old paper being torn. Marat listened in silence as Loran explained, careful, measured, omitting the parts that made him sound mad. When he finished, Marat only said, "Residual code." Loran frowned. "Sir?" Marat didn't look up from his data slate. Servo-Skulls sometimes retain fragmentary recordings of their previous hosts. Data ghosts, nothing more. It happens. They recite old code, half-forgotten prayers, even names. But, my name? Marat's metal fingers clicked against the slate. You work near it often, don't you? It probably stored your vocal pattern. Echoed it back. That doesn't explain. Marat finally looked up, one augmetic eye glowing red. It doesn't need to explain, scribe. You do not question the Omnissiah's will. Loran's mouth went dry. Yes, Overseer. Marat leaned closer. Do not bring this up again. Machines are sacred. Their mystery is not for you to understand. Do your work, say your prayers, and remember your place. Yes, Overseer. Good. He tapped his slate. Dismissed. On that night, Loran worked late again. Not by choice this time. The overseers had ordered extended hours to make up for lost efficiency. He told himself he'd imagined everything, that it was truly residual code. Nothing divine, nothing sinister, just noise. But as the hours passed, the archive began to feel heavier. The silence wasn't silent anymore. It pressed against him, thick and alive. The skull hadn't appeared all evening. He almost felt relieved, until he noticed the reflection. In the surface of the data console before him, faint, distorted, he saw movement behind his shoulder. He turned slowly. The skull floated there. Close, too close. Its lenses burned pale blue, and its Vox grill pulsed with faint static light. Loran swallowed. His voice trembled. "What do you want?" The skull tilted its head slightly, as if listening. Then the static deepened, the kind of sound that fills the chest rather than the ears. "He remembers you." He backed away until he hit the desk behind him. "Who?" The skull didn't answer. Instead, it spoke something else. Not words, numbers, a sequence rapid and precise. 77-3A-0X-Prime, Sector 19A, Underflow. Loran recognized the format. That was a record identifier, a file reference within the archive, but the prefix didn't match any active catalog. He whispered, half to himself, "There's no such file." The skull twitched violently, servo motors whining. Its Vox grill crackled again, louder, like interference building pressure. He watches from the data flow. Then it went still. The lights above flickered, once, twice, and the skull fell silent, hovering motionless again like nothing had happened. Loran's breath came in short gasps. He reached for his data slate and entered the code. 77-3A-0X-Prime. Access denied. Restricted. Even for overseers. He shut the slate off quickly. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He felt watched, not by the skull now, but by something through it. Like whatever spoke wasn't inside the machine, but looking out from somewhere else. He didn't finish his shift. He left early, told the watch serf he was feeling unwell. As he walked back through the corridors, the sound followed him, a faint, rhythmic clicking, like servo joints shifting just out of sight. Every time he turned, nothing was there. He reached his cell, sealed the door, and sat down against it, breathing hard. The lumen light above flickered weakly. He whispered, "This isn't real. It's just a malfunction." Then, faintly, from somewhere above the vents, came a response. "Malfunction. Malfunction. Faith error. Faith error." The words repeated, distorted, warped like echoes in a machine. He pressed his palms to his ears, whispering prayers faster now. The air felt wrong, thick, vibrating with low-frequency static. The Vox grill in the corner of the room hissed. A new voice came through, not human, not machine, something between. "Loran. You wrote his name once." He stared at the grill. His mind reeled. He had written a name once, years ago. A name he wasn't supposed to transcribe, a requisition for an inquisitorial record, an order sealed and forgotten. He'd only seen it for a moment before the system wiped the entry, but he remembered the name. It had burned into his memory like fire. Morthen Vale. He whispered it now, trembling. "How do you know that?" The Vox answered, softly, like a breath behind the walls. "He remembers you." Then the lights went out. When the lumen strips finally flickered back on, the room was empty. Loran sat in silence, hands clasped, staring at the floor. The Vox grill was dark again, silent as stone. He didn't move for a long time. He didn't sleep. The next morning, when the overseers arrived to begin the cycle, they found him already at his desk, pale, hollow-eyed, working faster than ever. When asked if he was unwell, he simply said, "No, overseer. I am faithful." But behind his eyes, something had changed. Every time a Servo-Skull passed overhead, he flinched. Every flicker of blue light made his breath catch. He tried not to look, not to think, not to listen. But late that shift, one of the scribes leaned toward him and whispered quietly, almost as if repeating a rumor. "Do you ever hear them talk?" Loran turned slowly. "What?" "The Servo-Skulls," the man said, eyes darting upward. "Sometimes they say things that aren't in any prayer." "You hear them too?" Loran's mouth went dry. He wanted to say no, he wanted to pretend. But the scribe just smiled weakly, almost relieved. "I knew it wasn't just me." Loran didn't answer. But somewhere behind them, floating near the ceiling, a skull's vox crackled faintly, and through the static, both men heard it whisper, "He remembers you." Got it. The next 7 days passed like a fever dream. No one spoke of it, but everyone felt it. The air in the archive had changed. It wasn't just Loran anymore. Other clerks had begun to whisper about errors in the Servo-Skulls. Faint voices, static distortions, murmured words that didn't match any known litany. No one said it openly. No one dared. But in the quiet between shifts, when the overseer's eyes were turned elsewhere, Loran heard them. The low, frightened murmurs among the scribes, the nervous glances toward the ceiling, the way everyone started walking faster between aisles, pretending not to notice the floating skulls above. He caught one clerk, an older man named Scribe Malven, staring up at a skull one evening, whispering prayers over and over until his lips bled. When Loran asked if he was all right, Malvin just shook his head and muttered, "It said my mother's name." Then he tore the parchment in front of him and walked out. He never came back. The overseers called it clerical fatigue. They said the work was sacred, and those who faltered in devotion were simply being tested. A few were sent to the reconditioning cells under Archive Level 6. None returned. Loran tried not to think about them. He tried not to think about anything. He kept his head down, worked faster. But every time his stylus touched parchment, he felt eyes on him, cold, artificial, and ancient. The skulls were everywhere now, dozens of them. They'd always been there, of course, drifting between the aisles, recording data, reciting litanies. But lately there were more than usual, unassigned ones, unregistered. When he asked Overseer Marat about it, the man simply said, "Praise the Omnissiah. The machine spirits multiply where there is purity. That word had started to sound hollow, because the machines didn't feel pure anymore. They felt watchful. One night, near the end of the 14th shift cycle, Loran stayed behind again. He wasn't supposed to, but he needed to know. He'd been dreaming of that file, 77-3A-0X-prime. The one the skull had whispered. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it flash behind his eyelids like a code burned into thought. He told himself it was curiosity, but it wasn't. It was compulsion. He waited until the overseers left. Then, heart hammering, he slipped into one of the secondary archive rooms, subsection 19, a gamma, and powered up an old cogitator terminal. Its screen flickered weakly, glowing a sickly green. He entered the access code. Denied. He tried again. Denied. Then, almost on instinct, he whispered the phrase the skull had said. He watches from the data flow. The cogitator hummed. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, faster than he could read. Then it stopped. A single file opened. There was no header, no authorization sigil, just text. Raw, Unformatted. He began to read. It wasn't a requisition, it was a transcript. Something old, decades old, maybe centuries. Most of it was corrupted, blocks of garbled binary interlaced with words in High Gothic. But he could make out pieces. Loran's blood ran cold. He scrolled down. There was more. Purge order authorized. Sector isolated. All records sealed by decree of Magos Biologis Threx. Then, abruptly, the screen went black. For a moment he thought the machine had failed, but then a single phrase appeared again, centered in pale text. He remembers you. He stumbled back from the console. His breath fogged the air. The machine was off, power indicator dead. Yet the words stayed on screen. He turned to leave, and froze. A Servo-Skull hovered in the doorway, silent still. Its eyes flickered faint blue. Loran whispered, "What are you?" The skull tilted slightly and spoke. "Forgotten data. Forgotten flesh." Then, in a lower tone, not vox, not mechanical, something else slipped through. A human voice buried in static. "Help me." He ran. Didn't look back. He sprinted through the aisles, robes whipping around his legs, heartbeat thundering louder than the hum of the archive. He didn't stop until he reached the central chamber, a vast circular hall with a glowing cogitator altar at its center. There, Overseer Marat and two others were reciting the rite of purification over a broken data terminal. Loran burst in, panting. "Sir," Marat's augmetic eyes flared. "You dare interrupt a ritual?" "It's the skulls," Loran blurted out. They're speaking again." Not code. Words, real words. The other overseers exchanged glances. Marat straightened. "You were told to stop this nonsense." "I found a file," Loran said quickly. "A record about something called Morthen Vale. It mentioned..." Marat's voice cut like a blade. "Enough." Loran stopped. The silence felt heavy. Marat's face twitched, something between anger and fear. "You will forget that name," he said quietly. "But it's in the archives. You will forget it." His voice rose, no longer bureaucratic calm, but a hiss of controlled panic. "You are a scribe. You write what you are told. You do not interpret. You do not discover. You do not remember." Loran took a step back. "Then why is it there?" Marat's augmetic hand clenched. "Because some things are meant to stay buried." He leaned closer, whispering, "Do you understand, scribe?" Loran didn't answer. He just looked at Marat, really looked, and realized the overseer's hands were shaking. That frightened him more than anything else. He didn't go back to his quarters that night. Instead, he hid. There were unused storage chambers on the lower levels, cold, damp, filled with dust and half-functioning cogitators. He stayed there, sitting among the old shelves, staring into the dark. He could hear the Servo-Skulls moving through the halls above, the faint hum of their engines, the soft clatter of bone against metal. Sometimes he swore they paused outside the door. He tried to pray again, tried to recite the litanies, but the words didn't fit anymore. They felt like broken gears grinding against rust, and every time he whispered a verse, something in the darkness seemed to echo it back, distorted, mockingly gentle. "By ink and will I serve. By ink and will I serve. By flesh and data I remain." He covered his ears. By the third night, he wasn't alone anymore. A few other clerks had come down too, ones who'd also heard the whispers. They gathered around in silence, afraid to look each other in the eye. One of them, a woman named Scribe Nima, spoke first. Her voice was thin. "They follow me home now," she said. "The skulls. They stop outside my door. I can hear them whispering through the vents." Another nodded quickly. "Mine too. They keep saying the same thing, about someone remembering Loran swallowed. Did any of you ever see the file? They all shook their heads. Nima whispered, "What file?" He hesitated, then said it anyway. 77-3A-0X-prime. The moment he said it, the lights above them flickered. All of them froze. Then, from somewhere deep in the archive, a mechanical hum rose long and low. Loran felt it vibrate through the floor. Every lumen went out. In the dark, a faint blue light appeared, drifting through the corridor outside. A Servo-Skull, then another, and another. Dozens of them hovering silently, filling the hall with their dim, flickering glow. Nima whispered, "Omnissiah, protect us." The skulls stopped at the doorway. For a moment, none moved. Then one of them spoke, a voice not from one, but all of them together, layered and distorted. "He remembers you." The sound shook the air, a whisper that felt like 1,000 memories being spoken at once. Loran dropped to his knees, clutching his head. The phrase repeated again and again, overlapping itself until it became a chant. "He remembers you. He remembers you. He remembers you." The others screamed. Then, just as suddenly, silence. The skulls turned and drifted away, vanishing back into the dark. When the lights came back on, the floor was covered in fine gray dust, like ashes. One of the clerks was gone, just gone. Only his robes remained. The next morning, Overseer Marat announced that several workers had abandoned their duties and been expunged from record. No one asked questions. No one looked up from their work. Loran didn't either. He just kept stamping, sealing, filing, over and over. But inside, he knew something was breaking, not just in him, but in the archive itself. He started noticing small things, files vanishing from the system, prayers rewritten mid-chant, data entries looping back to themselves, and every time a skull passed by, it turned slightly toward him, as if watching. One day, when he looked up, he saw one hovering above the Overseer's dais. A red purity seal dangled from its frame. It was stamped with a sigil he'd never seen before. Not Mechanicus, not Administratum. Something older, and for the briefest moment before it drifted away, he could swear it whispered again. Not to him, but through him. "He remembers you." On a small parchment hidden beneath his desk, he scribbled the phrase again and again, as if writing it might make sense of it. But the more he wrote, the stranger it looked. The letters began to change shape, twisting, reforming into patterns he didn't recognize. He tried to stop, but his hand kept moving. When he finally looked down, he realized what he'd written wasn't words anymore. It was a face, half human, half machine, and the ink was still wet, though he hadn't refilled his stylus in hours. He didn't go to work the next morning, or the one after. No one came looking, but the whispers didn't stop. They grew softer, more constant, following him even in sleep, like someone breathing just behind his ear. And somewhere deep within the endless archive halls, unseen and unrecorded, the Servo-Skulls kept drifting. Their lenses flickered blue, their mouths moved without sound, and every now and then, through the hum of the Vox, the phrase still came, quiet as a dying prayer. The days stopped lining up. Loran still showed up at desk 711-Gamma, still stamped, sealed, and filed, yet hours slid like oil. He'd look up and the lumen strip above his station would be dimmer than it had any right to be. He'd blink and the shift gong would toll as if he'd slept sitting upright with his eyes open. Everyone moved a little too slow and a little too fast at once, like the archive had forgotten how clocks work. No one spoke much. When they did, their words landed wrong, out of sync with their mouths. Even the prayers sounded offset, the litanies one breath ahead or behind, a chorus that couldn't find itself. The Servo-Skulls multiplied. That was the first truth everyone pretended not to see. They drifted in pairs now, then triads, then shoals, bright fish of bone and iron gliding the stacks. Their lenses pulsed in soft blues and pale whites, sometimes flicking red for a half-second, the way a muscle twitches in sleep. A few bore new seals, fresh wax, still faintly warm, stamped with sigils Loran didn't recognize. Not Mechanicus, not Administratum. The impression looked like a circle cut by a vertical line, an old mark, old enough to feel wrong. When they passed, you could hear the data flow under the hum. Not words at first, just the texture of numbers, a rain of digits inside static. Then the cadence settled into something like prayer. Snatches at the edge of hearing. The overseers announced an efficiency purge. Scribes were rotated, desks reassigned, access narrowed. The mag keys to restricted bays changed twice in one day. Oversight rounds doubled. Overseer Marat's voice gained a rattle. He coughed into a cloth he never unfolded all the way. "We will not entertain machine superstition," he told the row. "We will maintain output. We will keep the faith kept. Output fell." Files looped back to their headers, stamps imprinted over stamps, parchment went glossy with too much sealant. A requisition for hinge rivets duplicated itself across 3 sectors and came back redlined with a note. "Archive speaks in errors. Correct it." The note had no author tag. Loran tried to file it anyway. The cogitator spit it back with a little chuckle of static. By the 3rd cycle, the whispers were everywhere. They began as overlapping murmurs inside the vox, layered like thin paper. You'd lean to adjust a lumen and hear 2 voices reciting the litany of transcription, one steady, one syllable late, like an echo that forgot its job. Then a 3rd voice would arrive, human and hesitant, saying a name you knew you'd never told anyone here. Someone would flinch. No one would look up. Scribe Nima, pale and sleepless, started carrying a length of rosary chain around her wrist and counting links when she wrote. "What do they say to you?" Loran asked once, voice no louder than the scrape of his stylus. She didn't look at him. "They finish my sentences." "How?" "They start before I do." He had no reply for that. "How did you argue with the future that arrived from the ceiling?" They came closer. The skulls no longer kept the polite distance of old protocols. They hovered within arm's reach, lenses tracking hand movements, vox grills fluttering like ribs. A skull paused over a fresh sheet at Lauren's desk and released a single fall of ash. No heat, no smoke, just a dusting like gray snow that outlined the words he had not yet written. When he hesitated, the skull whispered gently, "Go on." He wrote what the dust had drawn, a crate count that matched a shipment he hadn't processed yet. Hours later, a servitor pushed the exact numbers past his station. He stamped, sealed, filed, and understood nothing. Some scribes resisted. Scribe Malvin, who'd once said the skull spoke his mother's name, returned after 3 days away with a shaved head, his scalp traced with fresh purity runes. He stood beneath a skull and recited the canticle of correct entry until his voice bled again. The skull tilted, almost tender, and breathed into the vox. "You missed a line." Malvin laughed until he cried. He didn't come back after that. The archive began answering itself. In the central chamber, the cogitator altar flickered through the night. Loran watched it on a late shift, the blue of the lumen washing Marat's gaunt face as he keyed in queries with a precision that scraped the air. Each query returned before it was finished. Fields filled themselves, footers signed themselves with sigils redacted as they formed, then reappearing in different arrangements, as if the machine were thinking in circles to hide its path. Marat's hands shook again. He bared his teeth as if in pain and intoned, Rite of Purification, Phase 3. The other overseers intoned back. The altar hummed deeper, a pitch you felt in your ribs. The skulls gathered above the dais in a loose halo, their lenses dilated like pupils. He watches from the data flow, the altar said, not from a mouth, but from every surface at once. Marat froze. The chant fell apart on the floor. Then the altar corrected itself, voice reflattening into sanctioned monotone. Purge complete. Everyone exhaled. Loran did not. He had felt, for one breath, the archive lean toward them like a listener. That night, the clocks lost 10 minutes, not by accident. The shift gong rang late, and the servitors' charge cycles realigned to the new time without anyone touching their panels. That was how Loran knew. They had agreed. Machines do not agree unless someone asks them a question they can answer together. Scribe Nema began sleeping under her desk. Loran pretended not to notice the blanket rolled tight in her drawer. In the mess, whispers traveled table to table like contraband. The name that couldn't be said, Morthen Vale. The file that shouldn't exist, 77-3 A-0X-prime. The phrase no one admitted to hearing first, he remembers you. The cooks ladled gray paste as if distributing confessions. Every bowl looked the same. No one finished theirs. On the 5th cycle, a skull followed Loran to the wash basin. It hovered over the steel trough while he scrubbed ink from his fingers. Their reflections swam together in the metal. His thin, sallow face, its immaculate bone, the lace of riveted brass like a crown. "Why me?" he asked the reflection, because asking the skull felt like admitting belief. The skull answered in a layered whisper, one machine tone, one human. "You wrote the door." "I don't know what that means." "You will?" He dried his hands on his sleeve. "Who is he?" Static hissed, then cooled into words. "Forgotten data. Forgotten flesh." A fragile pause. "Morthen Vale." Loran's stomach turned. "He's dead." A new voice leaned through, low and almost kind, a voice he recognized without knowing how. "Not from here." The skull drifted back. For one heartbeat, its lenses showed him a mirrored image of himself. The same eyes, but older, streaked with light. He didn't sleep that cycle either. The archive grew a weather. Drafts walked the aisles against the direction of the vents. A cold spot formed in subsection 19, a gamma, the temperature dropping across one narrow strip of floor where the yellow hazard paint had worn to a gray smile. You could set a cup of recaf there and watch its skin shiver. Loran put his palm down and felt the vibration of a voice moving underneath, low enough to scratch bone. He snatched his hand back and tasted metal for an hour. Scribe Nema brought him a strip of waxed cloth with a prayer stamped into it. "Tie it to your desk," she whispered. "Old habit. My mother did this for the stove at home when it started, talking." "Did it help?" "It felt like I was trying." He tied it. The skulls paused to read the prayer as they passed. One of them, jaw hinge sealed with red wax, issued a tiny sound like a laugh. The laugh hurt to hear. By the end of the week, the archive had begun answering names. If you thought a name hard enough while your hand hovered over a ledger, the margins would bloom with faint watermark letters. Not written by ink, not present to the eye unless you wanted them. A ghost hand under the page. Loran tried not to test this. On the 3rd try, the watermark spelled Loran. On the 4th, it wrote Remembbered. On the 5th, it drew a line and left it blank for him to fill. He didn't. The overseers announced a visit from the Mechanicus, a magos biologist, Threx by name. The room inhaled as one, even the skulls stilled. "Purity audit," Marat said, voice steadier than his hands. "A blessing. Blessings are knives when you're the thing being cut open." Loran knew that from a different life he wasn't sure he'd lived. That night, the skull with the red jaw seal met him at the threshold of Restricted Bay, 19A/Beta. No overseer to see. No witness but dust and old incense. "Don't," Loran whispered, not sure whether he meant, "Don't follow me" or "Don't make me choose." The skull hovered close enough for him to smell the holy oils in its seams. "He watches from the data flow," it said softly, not as a warning but as an invitation. "So you can find him." "How?" The skull's eyes lowered, almost a nod towards the lock rune, an oval of copper inset with a narrow slit of light. The slit flared, then dimmed in a rhythm he recognized too late. It was counting with him. His breath matched it without trying. Inhale, 1. Exhale, 2. The rune breathed back, a slow, patient exchange. His air, its light. "You wrote the door," the layered voice repeated, as if reminding him of something he hadn't done yet. "Write it again." Loran reached out. He didn't touch the rune. He traced the air near it, the way a scribe sketches a letter before ink. The light shivered, then broke into a lattice of smaller lights, a script he'd never learned and somehow knew how to read. He stepped back, shaking. The skull waited. He could feel the archive listening. Behind the lock, in a room that had been sealed longer than his life, something slow turned its head. The shift gong rang late again. Somewhere above, the overseers began the chant for the morning cycle, one voice lagging a syllable behind the rest. The skull's lenses widened, reflecting him as two figures. Loran now, and the man he was becoming because the archive asked. He pressed his palm against the air where the rune's light burned and spoke plainly, like a line item in a ledger. "Open." The door did not open. Not yet. But the light crawled, obedient, and spelled a name he had only ever seen once, on a day the machine pretended to forget. Morthen Vale. From the walls, from the vents, from the bones in the ceiling, the whisper came, gentle as breath on paper. "He remembers you. Perfect. You've reached the closing arc of your Warhammer 40K, short, a whisper in the Servo-Skull. They say curiosity is a sin in the Administratum. Not written as such. Officially, it's process deviation. But every clerk in the lower archives knows. If you start asking why, they start measuring you. And once they start measuring, they find a place to cut." Loran asked anyway. He started small. A pencil hidden in his sleeve, a page titled Lexicon. Whispers. He wrote down everything the Servo-Skull said, phrases that shouldn't exist. 77-3 A-0X-prime. Forgotten data. Forgotten flesh. You wrote the door. Phase 3 complete. He marked the times, the aisles, the temperature changes. A pattern formed. The whispers came most often near Restricted Bay, 19A/Beta, around Desk 711-Gamma, and during the Overseer's purification rites. They avoided the reconditioning corridors completely. Scribe Nima noticed him charting. "You're mapping it," she whispered. "The whispers aren't random." "Nothing here is random," she said. "That doesn't make it safe." The skull with the red wax seal began following him. It never spoke first, but always lingered. When he wrote, it hovered close as if reading over his shoulder. He tested it. Crate 4427B, destination. Tithe Bay 9, delay 2 shifts, flag reason. Phase 3, failed before it began. What does that mean? Ask the door. Then Loran asked what terrified him most. What is Morthen Vale? The air grew cold. Classification exceeds yours. Alpha. Name inside name. Was he a heretic? Yes. He stopped sleeping. The hum of the archive began sounding like layered voices. The pipes chanted. The vents prayed. He heard the skull even when it wasn't near. "Why me?" he asked one night. "You already listen." He began cross-referencing the phrases in old Mechanicus texts. Underflow meant coolant flow. Phase 3 appeared in purification rites. But you wrote the door was nowhere, so he drew it. An oval with a slit of light, one shape within another, an eye staring back. The skull hovered over it, close enough. For what? To open. Paper can't open doors. Not paper, it whispered. Nerve. He didn't understand until later. When he finally dared, he found an empty room. One door, no vents. He barred it and set the skull down. I don't know the rite, he said. Neither do I. He took a scribe's knife and lifted the purity plate beneath its jaw. The skull hummed softly through his hands. Almost, it said. When he pried away the inner plate, he saw it, a crescent of gray tissue, wet and living, pulsing faintly like a tiny heart. He froze. What is that? The whisper came not through air, but skin. Door. He touched it. It was warm, and somewhere in the endless halls of the Administratum, the machines went quiet, just long enough for the whole archive to listen. The hum of the archive changed the moment Loran touched it. It wasn't sound anymore. It was pulse. The walls vibrated like a choir too low to hear. The skull's eyes dimmed. The tissue, warm, alive, twitched beneath his finger and shivered like something dreaming. He should have screamed. Instead, he whispered, "I'm sorry." The tissue pulsed again. Once, twice. Then a shape moved behind his eyes, light without source, thought without word. He wasn't in the archive anymore. He was in something. Inside a corridor made of data and bone, endless rows of memory, voices, prayers, screams, inventory logs, all flowing through a single conduit. Every sound he'd ever heard in the archive lived here. Every whisper, every data glitch, every prayer half-finished because someone died before Amen. And above it all, something vast and quiet watched him. "Who are you?" he asked the silence. "You wrote the door," it answered. "And then you forgot." He saw flashes, a man in red robes, a magos, perhaps, hands cutting into skulls, inserting gray flesh that pulsed with forbidden life. Loran realized the truth. Servo-Skulls weren't just relics. They were vessels, half machine, half memory. The Imperium's dead, rewired to serve forever. But someone, something, had used them for more. "He remembers you," the voice said again. "All who served are written in him." "Who?" Loran whispered. "Morthin Vale." The name rippled through the code. The world flickered red. He gasped, and the vision snapped shut. He was back in the room. The skull was silent now, hollow. The tissue still pulsed faintly, as if breathing through its own terror. He wanted to call for help, for the Mechanicus, for anyone. Instead, he took the knife and cut it free. He didn't know why, only that he couldn't leave it there. It was wrong, but so was everything else. He wrapped the small, trembling piece in parchment and sealed it inside his pocket. When he looked up, every lumen strip in the room was dark. Only one thing glowed, the data slate on his desk, which he hadn't touched. On its screen, in his own handwriting, it spoke the truth. They found his station empty the next morning. The parchment stacks were neatly arranged, his ink still wet, his chair pushed in. Overseer Marrett's report listed it as dereliction of duty. The skull assigned to his station was missing too. The Mechanicus audit team arrived within the day. Red robes filled the aisles, chanting diagnostics. Their servo-skulls flew in formation like carrion birds over a corpse. The Magos biologies, leading them, Threx, wore a crown of copper tubes and spoke only in binary clicks. He reviewed the logs, then the staff. He asked one question to every clerk. "Have any of you heard the words 'He remembers you'?" No one answered. Most didn't even blink. Silence was devotion now. When they reached Desk 711-Gamma, Threx paused. He bent close to the surface of the metal desk, tracing a finger across something unseen. There were words carved there, so faint the eye missed them, but the augmetic fingertip didn't. "You wrote the door." He ordered the desk burned. He ordered the section sealed. He ordered the name Loran purged from the registry. Yet that night, when Threx reviewed his own data logs, one file remained unclassified. No header, no sigil, no traceable origin. He opened it. Inside was one line of text. "He remembers you." He shut the slate. He didn't sleep. By the next morning, the Magos was gone. Weeks passed. The archive returned to silence, or something close enough. New scribes filled the empty desks. Overseer Marat's hands trembled when he gave the morning orders, but his voice never cracked again. Production rates climbed. The prayers grew louder. The skulls drifted back to their lazy, silent patrols. Everything was back to normal, or so they said. But at night, when the lumen lights dimmed to half and the echo of footsteps faded, the stillness felt different. Not empty. Listening. The skulls still moved, but slower now, like they were waiting for something. Sometimes one would pause mid-flight, tilt slightly toward the floor, and emit a faint sound. Not a word. Just breath. A few scribes said they heard more. They said sometimes the skulls whispered names. Old names. Names erased from the ledgers. One claimed to hear a whole phrase. A full sentence, soft and close. It spoke the truth, but no one repeated it aloud. Not after the last clerk who did was transferred, without record, to service reassignment. Months later, the upper archives hosted a full inspection. The Mechanicus had brought new purity protocols, extra seals, blessed oils, exorcism hymns on every cogitator loop. During the 7th shift of the audit, the lights failed across Archive 19A. For 23 seconds, total darkness. When they came back, the Vox network glitched across the entire sector. The workers froze. Through the static came a faint human voice, dry, tired, whispering between breaths. Forgotten data, forgotten flesh. He remembers you, then silence. The tech priests locked the network, purged the cache, and declared the sector sanctified. They said it was a remnant of corrupted code. They said no soul could speak through data. They said a lot of things. But that night, one of the junior adepts swore he saw a Servo-Skull hovering over the old sealed door of 19A/Beta. Its eyes glowed faint blue, and from within its Vox grill came a heartbeat. Not digital, not machine, but slow, organic. Years later, Archive 19A is still operational. Its workers change every generation. Its shelves never empty. No one remembers the name Loran. No one recalls the missing Magos. Even the Overseer is long gone, his desk reassigned, his records overwritten. But some nights, in the endless silence between the chime of the prayer bell and the first toll of morning, a faint sound rises through the vents. It isn't static. It isn't data. It's breath. And if you listen too closely, you'll hear the words, half machine, half memory, echoing across eternity like the whisper of something that once called itself human. He remembers you. The sound fades into the hum of the archive. The skulls keep drifting. The lights flicker, steady again. And the work continues. Because in the Imperium of Man, work is prayer, and prayer even now is heard.